I now call on Her Excellency Ambassador Elisabeth Tichy-Fisslberger, Permanent Representative of Austria to the United Nations, and also, as I mentioned before, in the Presidency of the European Union at the moment. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much to the Order of Malta and all the other organizers. As Ambassador Stevens mentioned, I was for a few years the Austrian coordinator against human trafficking. I used to organize with my staff such EU anti-human trafficking days. It was a lot of work, and I'm very glad this year to be participating in an event because it's wonderfully organized by colleagues. The EU anti-trafficking day is supposed to be particularly, above all, awareness raising day. So let me tell you a story which happened in my country, because human trafficking happens everywhere. UK police uncovered a gang of child traffickers. They found £180,000 which had been earned by 160 children in 1 month. So there was police cooperation all across the continent. Somehow they ended up with their investigations in Romania and searched 17 palatial villas in Romania, built by these traffickers. The children had disappeared in the meantime. They were just trying to find money or whatever. One of the children who disappeared there ended up in my country, in Austria, Vienna, and was taken up by a special shelter for children and started to tell her story. And the story was she was 14. She was forced to beg. If she didn't bring enough money during the week, she was forced into prostitution over the weekend. She had up to 14 clients each weekend, and she got 150 euros per weekend. She was told that was a good price. We suppose that each and every one of these clients had to pay at least that sum. Now this girl wasn't aware that this was human trafficking and that she was the victim of a crime. And when she was told by people who took care of her that this was a crime in Austria and people needed to be punished and that in fact the money was very little, what she said was, but why is that little money? My father is a bricklayer in Romania and he gains 80 euros per month. So this story already shows a lot of what we talk about. It shows that, first of all, victims are extremely vulnerable. We are talking about extreme differences between countries. And we also see that we can only uncover such stories if there is massive international cooperation, which work rather well in that case. Human trafficking happens everywhere. We have figures from various international organizations, and I'm sure we will hear more about this later on, but all these figures are estimates. We know that this is the tip of the iceberg. It's a huge growth ground. It's the third most lucrative form of international crime after drug trafficking and arms trafficking, and it is the least risky for the perpetrators. There's almost total impunity. Perpetrators are nil. It's not only a crime, as Ambassador Stevens said, it's also a way of undermining democratic societies, regular economy, as well as development perspectives in the poorer countries. What are the reasons? The reasons are all the upheavals we witness all over our globe at the moment. First of all, extreme poverty, having to do with wars, having to do with disasters, both humanitarian and ecological. All kinds of deficiencies in various states, bad governance, corruption, a lack of a legal system, judiciary system, and perpetrators who use all this for a free ride, who are completely unscrupulous and very creative. The bad situations in some countries really is like an advertisement for people smugglers and also for traffickers. And they offer simple solutions. For people who want to get away, they say, no problem, we organize your trip, you pay later. And this paying later means that the person will be exploited once arrived at destination. The forms of human trafficking are to 80% sexual exploitation. So there we talk about a vast majority of female victims, women and girls. It comes in all kinds of variations. It's forced prostitution, but also child marriages and fake adoptions and other things. The special UN rapporteur on human trafficking, Maria Grazia Giamarinaro, who recently gave a speech in New York, she said there is a 600% increase of Nigerian women being trafficked into Europe into prostitution over the last 3 years, in spite of all the efforts international communities undertake. Then we have various forms of labor exploitation. They all have in common that it's badly paid jobs, which do not require a lot of qualifications, which take place in places which are invisible, which have a high fluctuation of staff, seasonal work and other things. And you find that in sewing, you find it in cleaning, you find it in catering, in hotels, in care for the elderly, domestic work, including in diplomatic households. That's an interesting topic. My ministry has developed a zero tolerance policy in these cases, and there is a project inside the OSCE which has been going on for various years, where protocol departments of foreign ministries work together in order to prevent such situations if possible. Then there is the construction sector, which can be dangerous because it works with a lot of subcontracting. So you have a very respectable architect and his company who gives the tender, win the tender, but then you have all these subcontractors whose job is to treat the workers very badly in order to make big business benefit from these low wages. Recruitment agencies can be very dangerous. You find everything from modeling agencies to marrying agencies to agencies who send you posted workers cross-border, and there's a lot of risk potential in that as well. Mining is dangerous, agriculture is, processing of agricultural goods as well. And then there are the cases which I mentioned briefly earlier on, those who force mostly children into begging, and also sometimes into pickpocketing, petty crime. Internet is a major new source of danger, in particular for the recruitment. On the internet, and in particular on the darknet, you find everything from mail order brides to organ trafficking. Another sad chapter is child trafficking. Child trafficking is very easy for the perpetrators because children don't know where to flee. They always come back to the perpetrators because they don't know where else to go. Outside Europe, you find even worse forms of human trafficking, like hostage-taking, child soldiers, organ trafficking. If you travel to India, you might find that many, India or somewhere else in the region, that many people owning a rickshaw have a scar on their back, and that shows that they probably paid their rickshaw with a kidney. And then we have terrorists, who force women into marriages with warriors and do everything up until organ trafficking. The victims always have one thing in common: they are very poor, they are so poor and so desperate that the only thing they can monetize is their own body, and they are prepared to do that because they think their situation cannot get any better, and also because people make them believe that what they propose to them is a real offer, and they are not educated enough to tell the false promise from a real offer. They are very vulnerable, usually from the most discriminated parts of their own societies, sometimes very young, mostly very uneducated, sometimes belonging to minorities, sometimes being disabled, very often vulnerable because they are women. And they are additionally vulnerable because they don't have usually a residency status in the countries where they're being exploited, and sometimes they have multiple dependencies. They were brought by the trafficker to the place of destination. They have to pay back their travel and their accommodation, and probably they have contracted debts at home which they need to pay. So this is really a picture of a tragic situation which is hard to talk in terms of human tragedy. Legal instruments have been mentioned. We have at the international level the most important ones are called the Palais Protocol, to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. We have the Council of Europe Convention, which I'm sure Ambassador Tichy-Fisslberger will talk about later on, so I have to say nothing about that. And then we have the most detailed instrument, which is the EU directive mentioned by Ambassador Stephen. These days we talk a lot also, we hear a lot about modern slavery. Some people prefer that term. It's not a legal term, which you can find in any of these instruments. It's probably easier to make the general public understand what it is. The problem about this terminology of modern slavery as opposed to human trafficking is, and that was another thing which the EU Special Representative Maria Grazia Giamarinaro said, it hides the fact, if you say modern slavery, it somehow hides the fact that 80% are female. So that's one of the problems, but there is a debate about that. Now, what to do? There is no one-size-fits-all easy answer. There has to be a mix of smart policies. That's what the international organizations and the international community are trying to do. We have all these wonderful laws. It is very hard to implement them. The biggest enabler for the perpetrators usually is false tolerance. People who see something or who suspect something but don't quite dare to look, who turn a blind eye because very often they don't know to do what the victims if they have identified them as such. The jargon in all the international organizations is that you should work on the so-called 4 Ps. Ps for prevention of the crime, protection of the victims, prosecution of the perpetrators, and partnership, working together with others to avoid all this. What we are doing now is an exercise of prevention. We are trying to attract the attention of more people to what is going on. Another way of preventing, and that's also something which happens at the international level, is trying together to train certain categories of professionals, like, for example, police, but also prosecutors, teachers, health workers, consular staff, all kinds of professions who get in touch with potential victims. There is also an effort in many countries to inform victims. NGOs do that. We have seen this morning, there was a Swiss event, I don't know whether some of you went, equally attracting attention to human trafficking. They have a bus which goes around and tries to inform victims of the dangers. And of course what we all need to do is try to fight the root causes, but that is a lot easier said than done. In terms of protecting victims, that really is the touchstone of all the international regulations that we have. That's the most important thing, because we're talking about human rights violation. Now, the first challenge is to identify victims as such. Very often they don't go to the police, they're afraid to be deported or otherwise punished. So you have to identify them otherwise. Once they are identified as such, they have a set of rights. In most countries, they have right to financial and material support, like shelter and food. They have a right to medical and psychological assistance. Ideally, countries should have what they call a national referral mechanism, so kind of guidelines for different authorities in every country to know exactly what to do with the victim if you detect one. Then in many countries the judiciary has special provisions for victims of human trafficking and also for witnesses, because you can imagine if there is a court case they don't necessarily want to meet the perpetrators in court. And then other rules in the European Union, for example, say that the victims have a right of access to the labor market in the country where they are, and they have a right to compensation. Prosecution is difficult, as I said earlier on. It's the least dangerous crime, big organized crime for perpetrators. They're hardly ever caught. Police talk about lizard ends. What they mean is that if the perpetrators get caught, they're immediately replaced by somebody else, and as everybody knows, the lizard's ends, if they get cut off, they grow back, so there will always be enough of the perpetrators. And usually it is extremely difficult to prove what happened, because they are mutually agreed exploitative relationships. So the victim has agreed not to say anything because the victim is being threatened and other things. What is very important, I tried to mention that earlier on, is international police cooperation. In Europe we have Europol. Europol has adopted a policy of following the money, and that has turned out to be the most efficient way of seeing what is going on. both nationally and internationally, there has to be a cooperation between different authorities. So we have police, we have the judiciary, we have border controls, we have labor inspectorates, we have health authorities, social security, trade unions, and very importantly NGOs, both national and international. Usually what we see is that the state is there to legalize, to produce the law and try to implement it, but the persons that the victims have confidence with are usually the representatives of NGOs. So in that field, at least in my country and in other countries I know, there is a very good cooperation between the authorities and the NGOs who provide the actual assistance for which they get money, financial assistance from the state. So I said earlier on, it takes a smart mix. This is the real difficulty. We are dealing with perpetrators who treat human beings like a commodity. It's big business. There are the incentives for that big business. So what we really need to do is to undermine that business model, which is very difficult, and what it takes is not only authorities and laws, but really to work together with society at large, with consumers, to make consumers realize that part of the problem are supply chains. If products are very cheap, that is fishy, and consumers should think about it, and it is important to look at the money flows. I think I've already spoken too long. I could speak forever because I dealt with it for many years, but let me just say this as a final remark. There is a vicious circle. Human trafficking is very lucrative. The money which is being earned is being reinvested in other kinds of crime, like arms or drugs or whatever, and with that they make even more money with which they improve the infrastructure for human trafficking. So this is extremely hard to break. It is a very difficult task for the international community, but I think all of us who are in this room would agree there's nothing else we can do but to try our best to put a stop to that.
Thank you very much.